A little bit more from the reporting team that's in the Oval Office to pass along to you here on Hong Kong, which is, of course, such a flashpoint in U.S. China negotiations and in the region. The president saying we discussed Hong Kong, says things have toned down there, and he thinks that's going to take care of itself, but saying he did talk to the Chinese delegation about Hong Kong. Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, says, according to reporters in the room, that this deal that they're talking about today should be a good one for folks in Hong Kong. Interesting that Lighthizer mentions Hong Kong in a positive vein while sitting in the room with the Chinese delegation, which is enormously sensitive to any discussions of Hong Kong as being any potential threat to their sovereignty. So a couple of items there. Separately, Kayla Tausche reporting that Huawei issues will be dealt with separately from this agreement. The president says they will be talking about it. And Lighthizer also saying here that there's lots of time to deal with that December 15th round of tariffs, which is over the horizon. So they're talking about holding off on this round that was coming next week, but plenty of time to still discuss that December 15th round. The president saying it's not hard to get it done from this point, and saying, quote, these issues are not overly complex. Wilker.
Very much. It would be quite hard to see more on Huawei, given that some of their international allies, the U.S.'s international allies, have come around and had a harder position on Huawei in the last couple of weeks. A couple more nuggets from Kayla Tausche, of course, who's in the Oval Office. The president was asked what has changed, and the president said that this deal is bigger. But why have me say this? Because Kayla Tausche has just stepped out of the Oval Office and can sum up everything that's been going on for us herself. Kayla, what can you tell us? What's your main takeaways?
Well, the takeaway is that the president is branding this as a major win. He is calling this a substantial phase one deal, saying that there will be at least 2 phases, but that this one needs to get written over the next few weeks, that he and President Xi are expecting to sign this deal at some point in Chile when they meet for the APEC summit in just about a month's time. He said it won't be too hard to get it across the finish line, at least phase one, that is. And when I asked him what changed, because the last time the vice premier was sitting across from him in that very setting back in April, he said at that time a deal was 4 weeks away. The president said that a lot has happened in the intervening months and that this deal is bigger. He specifically talked about the currency pledge that the two sides have agreed to, and in the wake of Treasury branding China a currency manipulator. I asked the vice premier to answer that question as well, and the President Trump continued talking for a very long time, and then also many other reporters tried to get questions in. I repeated the question over again, and the vice premier leaned back and said, what changed is cooperation. So you can read into that as you will. We know that there have been many phone calls between the two leaders and the negotiating teams, as well as many negotiating rounds, some productive, some less productive in the months that transpired. But certainly President Trump is saying this is a big deal. It will help farmers, it will help investors, and it will help the American economy. So despite it not dealing with the intellectual property laws being changed in China, which is the hard line that many of his advisors were taking from the beginning, President Trump is branding this as a major win for the economy. Wilfred.
Kayla, what was the tone like between the president, his team, but more importantly, his Chinese counterpart? Was it noticeably better than past examples of this sort of gathering?
It was not tense. It was somewhat deferential. The vice premier waiting his turn when President Trump was speaking. There was a little bit less pomp and circumstance this time. In the past, the vice premier has read letters from President Xi and made grand pronouncements that were coming from Beijing. He handed him an envelope at one point during the exchange, but left it at that. The president's advisors were sitting there and interjected when they were called upon. But certainly it was a more casual tone, and I could sense some relief in the room, specifically when Ambassador Lighthizer jumped in to talk about the December 15th tariffs. Reporters were asking for some clarification on what would happen with the tariffs, because that was left out of the bullet points that the president read off at the top of this meeting. And Secretary Mnuchin was the one who said that the October 15th raise would not go into place, and then asked about the December 15th tariffs, which will be the most painful for the American consumer. Ambassador Ambassador Lighthizer, you could sense that he had some heartburn about those tariffs. He expressed some relief by saying there is a lot of time to work those out, essentially trying to communicate that if certain advisors have their way, that those tariffs would not go into place. I know there are many principals who share that view, but to hear that from Ambassador Lighthizer, who has been a proponent of the lion's share of these tariffs up until this point, I thought was a striking reaction.
So, Kayla, is the implication, therefore, that the December tariffs do not go into place provided there is ink on the paper in 3 weeks' time in Chile on phase one of this deal?
Correct. That's the right way to read this.
Mike, in terms of market reaction and that sell-off we saw into the close, of course, the last 18 minutes markets haven't been open. The market kind of got a grasp of what Kayla just summarized for us there?
I think so. I mean, there always was the possibility that there was going to be, a reflex sell on the news response. Look, we got the good news we've been anticipating right here. It's the end of a week, takes them off the table. But then again, we have further steps along the way to get something final. We're not free of it. Also, of course, not free of just the general global economic issues that this was not necessarily the cause of. So it makes sense to me that you would have pulled back a little bit. By the way, the market, the S&P pulled back almost to where it opened. So right. We opened with such a strong pop in the pre-market that essentially all of that buying throughout the day was unwound.
Thanks to Kayla Tausche, who no doubt will be back with us shortly.